good evening, and welcome back to the Tony Baptist Church Television Ministries and the Bible Speaks Today. If I look a little bit like a deer in the headlights, and of course many of you have noticed I'm wearing spectacles. One of the things that age brings us is diminishing eyesight, and I usually wear contacts because I'm told by the technical people in behind the glass there that spectacles reflect the Klieg lights or whatever they call them, and don't make for a good picture. But without them, like this, I can't see the monitor right in front of me here. So I have no idea what they're putting up there. So technical advances are great, but they have their drawbacks. As you'll see, we've got some wonderful background pictures again. Our virtual studio, I think one of the techies calls it, and they just changed the camera without telling me. The idea being that we can project all our different pieces on the back. The problem is, like all these new things, it takes a little bit of time to get used to them. And you know, there's different switches to throw and this sort of thing. And I have to tell you that we have a gentleman who runs our sound here who is the most patient chap in the world, because his stuff is okay. It doesn't need changing. Just check the mic, okay, we're good to go. Whereas the other gentlemen are going around like one-armed paper hangers, trying to get this right and that right. And I'll let you into a little secret. This beginning part of the program that you're watching now, we have done it 4 times before we found one we liked. I say, I'm in their hands, I do what they tell me. At any rate, you're going to see the background change. And for those of you who can't see past me, that is Cincinnati in the background. But we will change it to the various things that we're talking about as we go. Oh, look at that, the Temple at Jerusalem. Isn't modern technology wonderful? So now I'm having to remember what I'm trying to say and watch the picture when it changes so I say the right things. And of course, with the new lighting, all the imperfections such as my greying hair, etc., are brought to light. So if you want a career in television, make sure don't have grey hair, because they complain about it constantly. Anyway, we were in Bethel last week, and whilst I got quite into it, I need to go back and recap a few things, because looking at the time last week, I started to hurry up and got myself, too many things out without enough explanation. And I want to point out that when you see the map of Bethel, when it comes up on the screen, you'll notice that it's quite a long way from Jerusalem. Unlike the other cities we're going to talk about in the near future, like Bethlehem and Bethel Bethany, Bethel's quite a long way. But if you look at that route up, if you look from the bottom of the map at the bottom of the Lake of Galilee there, the Dead Sea, and go straight up, that is the route that Jacob took up through into Bethel. And next week, when we start doing Bethany, I'll be showing you some pictures of the tribal areas, so that you'll get a better idea of where all this takes place. But one thing to remember is all these cities of the Bible are so very close to each other from our perspective. Israel today and then, of course, is a very small country. It's not like you've got to drive from here to, if you drive from here to Louisville, okay, and take that into Israel, you've driven halfway across the country. It's all these Bible places are all very close together, because you see things like, they moved from here to Shechem, and from Shechem they moved to there. It really was a matter of 2 or 3 miles, something like that. But Bethel is quite north, okay? Now, when they split, when Solomon split the kingdom, or rather when the kingdom split after the death of Solomon in 931, okay, the Jeroboam, who was the succeeding, Rehoboam, who was his son and took over. You remember the story where he went to Shechem, the subject of one of our stories, programs a few weeks ago, and to be crowned, because Shechem in those days was the religious center. Now Shechem, as you can see by the map, those of you who've got your glasses on, is north of Jerusalem, that is. So the people from the northern tribes. Now you've got to understand this, why the people from the north were upset. The southern part of Israel was mostly Judah and Benjamin and a little bit of Gad. The other 10 of the tribes were the northern parts. If you haven't studied Solomon's building of the temples and things like that in detail, and I'm not talking about the biblical accounts, the historical accounts, Solomon, well, it's in the Bible as well, but it's not very clear. Solomon actually had people, like, you had to put a year in working on the temple. So you had to come off the farm, go down to Jerusalem, work on the temple for a year with very little pay, and then go back on the farm. And then, 2 or 3 years later, they'd grab you again. The people in the northern tribes were taxed, that's not the right word, were taken to work on the temple or conscripted to work on the temple far more in ratio, numbers to numbers, than were the tribes of Judah, which caused a lot, in other words, well, that's my tribe, I don't want my people working on, we'll use the other people. I mean, government was unfair in those days just as it is today. You want to, if you're the senator for Wisconsin, no disrespect to that senator or Wisconsin, but if you are, then if somebody says, oh, we need a tax on hot dogs, then okay, but not in Wisconsin, because that's where we make them. We don't want any taxes there. Government tends to be unfair. And when Rehoboam came to the throne, the northern tribes had a big axe to grind. They were being utilized more for the temple buildings and the big building projects that Solomon had, more than the southern tribes, which caused a lot of friction. So, and it's not spelled out in as many words in the Bible, but they had at the coronation ceremony, they basically the leaders got Rehoboam to one side, I suppose, or whatever they did in those days, and said, look, this is unfair. What you need to do is make it more fair. We're happy to help. We want to be part of building the temple, but you've got to make it more fair. So Rehoboam, naturally goes, oh, I didn't know this was a bigger problem. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But he took counsel of his young counselors. Now, being a young person himself, he obviously surrounded himself, as do people today, I think, with a bunch of camp followers and sycophants who are going to say what you want to hear. That's the trouble when you're leader, especially when you're the unchallenged leader, that everyone's going to tell you what you want to hear. So he asks the young men, what do you think? Should we share the load? Good Lord, no. No, we don't want to be doing that. Keep on doing it. So Rehoboam goes back most unwisely and says, nah, we're going to keep it the same. So the 10 tribes say, right, that's it, we're done, we're out of here. Rehoboam goes back to Jerusalem, and the 10 tribes declare or secede, just like Southern America seceded from the North America before the Civil War. Same sort of thing. Not happy with how they were treated. You'll remember one of the biggest causes of the Civil War, despite what people will tell you, or the common myth is that it was over slavery. Well, that was part of it, but that wasn't the real reason. It was over commerce. The South had all the agriculture, the North had all the industrial, basically. And so the South felt it wasn't getting its fair share. I mean, slavery and all the other things came into it, but I know I'm digressing slightly, but just to remind you that the slavery emancipation, the emancipation of the slaves, the Declaration, they'd been at war 2 years before that came out. Now, they'd been moving towards it, but that was what it was about. So anyway, so now we've got the kingdom split. We've got Rehoboam ruling basically the southern half of Israel, which is Benjamin and Judah, and Benjamin's such a small tribe it always gets lumped in with Judah, and then the other 10 tribes, north of Jerusalem, ruling their bit. And I don't have I wish I did, I came in with a map I could show you which has that split on it, but I didn't put it into the link, and they probably couldn't find it now if they wanted to anyway. So Jeroboam's the first king of Israel. Now, bear in mind, these aren't religious differences. These aren't, we don't like your high priest doing this, or we don't like the way you do your services, or we don't believe in God the Almighty, or anything like that. These people are the same. They worship exactly the same. They are Jews. So Jeroboam's got this unfortunate situation where when it comes to vacation, and it didn't happen overnight, trust me, when it comes to the yearly pilgrimages to the temple, or the yearly, the various feasts that come on where Jews are required to attend at the temple, the one behind me there, although it wasn't as grand as that. That's the temple from Herod's time, by the way. But anyway, they go down there and they take all their money and they buy their sacrifices down there and they give their money to the temple or the priests or the building projects or whatever. And that's all going out of Israel, which is what the northern kingdom is called now. Judah is the southern kingdom, Israel's the northern. All the money's going out. Well, that's like everybody in Kentucky. There's no cinemas in Kentucky, there's no bar, not likely, but if there were no bars in Kentucky and no racecourse in Kentucky and no cinemas, what would the Kentuckians do? They'd go across the river to Ohio, where they do have cinemas and bars and racetracks, right? And all the money, the hard-earned money that the government of Kentucky wants to keep and use for whatever, is gone. So pretty soon you know what's going to happen. It didn't, this is hypothetical, of course, but you'd see racetracks and cinemas and bars springing up all over Kentucky, wouldn't you? Keeping the money in the country. But when it comes to worship, that's serious. So what Jeroboam did was he had to have some image or something to center the religion in the northern kingdom. And so he had two calves of gold, two cows, if you will, small cows made of gold. All right. Now, before you say, "Oh, they've gone back to idol worship," remember, in the temple in the holies of holies, in the temple in Jerusalem, there were two carved statues. So what Jeroboam is trying to do is to take what they would see in Jerusalem and put it in his own kingdom. And so to make it easy, because Israel is quite a long, the country of Israel, if you like, as it was then, is a long country, long distances. So he put one up in Bethel, which is not too far from Jerusalem, so down the bottom end. So all the people down the bottom end had somewhere to go to. And then one up in Dan, and if you look at the tribe of Dan, they had the territory right up in the north of the country. So now we have two places of worship that the inhabitants of Israel could go to and not go running off to the temple and spend their money and give their gifts there. A practical, if you will, a practical answer to a difficult problem. And as I stress, this wasn't a different religion. This is the same religion, the same rules, the same dietary rules, the same fasting. Everything else was the same, except instead of going to the temple in Jerusalem, they went to Bethel or to Dan. Now, this obviously, I don't know what the American expression is, but talk the jaws is one I was going to use, of the Judeans. Because, hey, where's all this income that we used to have going to? So they were really uptight. There's a story in 1 Kings 13 that a visitor from Jerusalem, although why he was up in Israel, I don't know, but he prophesied that it would be destroyed in the future. In 2 Kings, the prophets Elijah and Elisha are said to have visited Bethel on a journey from Gilgal to Jericho shortly before Elisha's death. There's a story in some parts of the Bible which says he was teased by a bunch of kids, as he went up to the shrine, and he cursed them and told them that they'd be dead. And of course, if you read 2 Kings 2, they got killed by bears. But anyway, the friction between the two was because they'd set up another worship center from Jerusalem, and it wasn't so much religious as economic. Okay. Now, Bethel itself. So Bethel has got one of these idol places up. It's next mentioned in the Bible. The next mention we hear of is the 10th king of Israel. Now this is Northern Kingdom, 10th king of Israel. Jehu was 842 to 815 BC. he kills all the prophets of Baal and destroys their temple. Remember that? But he continued to tolerate the presence of the golden calves in Bethel and Dan, as per in Kings 2. And it seems that the Judeans who wrote that part of the Bible, or the people from Judah who tended to write that part of the Bible, took great offense at that, because they said, of course, it isn't our statues, it's theirs, and it's idols, and they've gone into idolatry. Okay, well then the Syrians invade, right, from Syria, okay, Assyria rather, and they come in about 730, something like that. But the shrine of Bethel doesn't get destroyed. The one at Dan did, but the shrine of Bethel still stands there. It's still being written about. But eventually, King Josiah invades Israel from Judah, invades Israel, and destroys it. It's one of the things they write about King Josiah. He did good in the eyes of the Lord was he destroyed the shrines at Bethel and in the high countries, right? If you read Ezra 2 and Nehemiah 7, various bits in the chapter, Bethel is mentioned again as being resettled at the time of the return of the exiles from Babylon. So when they came back from Babylon, there was no more Judah and Israel. It was just one country. So although they settled mostly in Jerusalem and surrounding areas, Bethel was settled again. Okay? I guess there was the remnants of the sign still there, or people still were going to it during the captivity, because Amos, the prophet Amos, says don't go to Bethel, don't go to Gilgal, don't go to Bathsheba. All these places were still practicing idolatry, and he warns them off. And Amos 5, he says Bethel will be reduced to nothing. Okay? And don't prophesy at Bethel. For some reason or other, no prophet is to prophesy at Bethel. Okay. A few years later than that, again, Bethel's still occupied. The prophet Hosea, who's in 8th century prophet, speaks of the wickedness of Bethel. And we assume by that what is happening is that the shrine, whilst it may have been destroyed by Josiah, was still obviously a place of worship. Maybe they built up the stones again. So despite the fact that the Israelites, or the Jews rather, have gone into captivity, come back from captivity and resettled the land, or gradually spreading out, Bethel gets re-inhabited, and what do? Go right back into the way they were before. Now don't forget, the Bible really talks a lot about the tribe of Judah being taken into captivity. But don't forget, before that, Israel was taken into captivity, and some of those people may well have ended up in Babylon, and may well have come back with the returnees from Judah. So you probably had people who were from what was the northern kingdom coming back and going back to their homes and starting up again. Jeremiah, Jeremiah was, really, really critical about a lot of things, but he speaks of the shame that the people in Bethel have brought upon Yahweh, upon God. In Hosea 13, it describes how the Israelites being people from the north, of northern descent, are abandoning God for the worship of Baal. And once again accuses them of using and making idols for worship. Okay? Chief amongst these idols, and they've dug them up, they've dug these idols up all over Israel, is the image of the bull. The bull, the calf, whatever, that was put up. There's a picture of it there. When we talk about golden calves, in the worship thing, they were literally statues that were covered in gold plate or whatever. But all over Israel, the northern kingdom, archaeologists are digging up these calves, these little stone calves. So people were obviously having them in their homes and this sort of thing. So there was quite a lot of idol worship going on. It wasn't just imaginary, shall we say. So what's happened is now that we have a problem with the Nehemiah and Hosea and all those people coming back and reintroducing or bringing back, the worship of one God into Jerusalem in the manner of which they were before they left. But with them is the Israelites who were living in the northern kingdom, and they brought back some of the things that nobody wants to talk about. So we end up with a situation where and my computer's just gone haywire on me. There we go. Don't trust electronic stuff. I should always have a paper script down in front of me, because invariably what happens as the time goes by, your computer turns off or clicks off. But we shoot these programs live, so live is what you get. Okay. By the time of Hosea, we know for sure that that the images, those calf images, bull images, were being worshipped as an image of Baal in that area, in the Bethel area. Now, Bethel then fell into disuse. I mean, it's up and down like a yo-yo. Fell into disuse, and then it got inhabited and fortified, built up as a fortified city by Bachides, the Syrian, in the time of the Maccabees. And it's just in the 400 BC. The Maccabees had this revolt. Bethel gets fortified. Okay? And then what happens, of course, is that the Romans come in, right? The Maccabees rebel. Rome sends its people in. Chief amongst whom was Vespasian, who eventually became emperor. Josephus, remember our friend Josephus in his Antiquities of the Jews? Josephus says that Bethel was captured by Vespasian. Now, it doesn't say anything more. It doesn't say, and he leveled it to the ground, although such a thing would not be impossible, since it was a town that was rebelling against Rome and was fortified. And the first thing the Romans did with fortified towns was knock the walls down, all right? Okay. But after there was some mention of Bethel by Eusebius in some of his writings, and Jerome mentions it, and then it kind of dies away. There are no further references to Bethel in the historical record or in the biblical record or anywhere. There's a town nearby called Bethel, which is reputed by tradition to be the site of Bethel, but in fact the ruins there, and it's not occupied anymore, the ruins there are much greater than a village, which Bethel purports to be, and have gone to some extensive, expansion after the time of Jerome. In fact, there's the presence of the ruins of churches from the Middle Ages, which are in, as I say, in Bethel, not in Bethel. Bethel seems to have disappeared from record. Now, in the first program last week, I showed you a picture of Bethel, and what it is the Rocky Mountain, and that's exactly what's there. The village of Bethel is just a mile or two away. But there's a religious sanctuary. Jacob was there. Some of the big early prophets and everybody was at Bethel. It was part of the huge kingdom of Solomon, and then eventually an important place in the northern kingdom and the kingdom of Israel. It shows up during the revolt of the Maccabees, when for a short while, a very short while, the Jews governed themselves as a country before the Romans came in and took it over. And then it just disappears. And there are so many prophecies of its doom that it makes you wonder why Bethel was singled out. I mean, Shechem's still there. Bethany's still there. Bethlehem's still there. Nazareth, all these other biblical places, they're all still there. Most of them exactly where they were back in those days. But Bethel, for some reason or other, is off the face of the earth. And all you can think of is maybe all these predictions of doom by various prophets and people, all these, woe unto you, Bethel, you shan't be there anymore, have simply come true because it just isn't there. I wish I could say, oh yeah, people go and visit it and it's there, well, but it isn't. It's just not there. All right. Bethel's a sad story. Most of the Bible cities, their stories aren't sad, not in the end anyway. But Bethel's sad. Next week, we start on Bethlehem, so you need to brush up on what you know about Bethlehem. We'll probably have some interesting graphics. Bethlehem has a lot more going for it than just having Jesus brought there, although that was important. Bethlehem's a lot of history, and we'll touch on that next week, all right? So read your Bibles, look up the reference Bethlehem and go read all the references, and I'll see you back here next week. Till then, good night and God bless.